Okay, welcome everyone. Today we're having a discussion on the First Law books by Joe Abercrombie. And I am so excited to have the opportunity to discuss these books with my fellow booktubers. I'm just going to quickly introduce each of them, and then we're going to get into the discussion. So I'll start with you, Patrick. Patrick is a royalty on Goodreads. I'm sure a lot of you have read his reviews. So great to have you here, Patrick. It's really an honor, and I want to personally congratulate you on just the distinction you've achieved by being one of the most followed and reviewers on Goodreads. That's just a tremendous achievement. That's really fantastic.
Thank you for having me, man.
And of course, Patrick has a rapidly growing YouTube channel as well. I definitely recommend you check it out. So thank you for being here, Patrick. And then, of course, there is Mike from Mike's Book Reviews. And it is also just such a great honor to have Mike here. He runs what has got to be my favorite YouTube channel. I absolutely love watching Mike's reviews and the whole vibe he has on his channel. The introductions to his videos always give me chills. They're just so well done, so professional. And it's just such a pleasure to listen to Mike while he's taking a sip of coffee and talking books. It feels like your best friend is talking to you. So thanks for being here, Mike.
Hey, I'm a big fan of your channel as well, so I'm glad to be here. Thank you so much.
All right. And then we have Mark from Slowly Read, his channel. Mark, it is just so awesome to have you here. I've been following Mark's channel for a good while now, and I absolutely admire the analysis on your channel, Mark, and I love the enthusiasm that you bring to your reviews. That is two of my favorite things about your channel. And actually, I think that Mark's channel is ripe for just blowing up with subscribers. Absolutely. I highly recommend his reviews. There's some great depth in those reviews. And just as an example, Mark just released his review of Best Served Cold this morning. I watched that review, and I have to tell you guys, I actually choked up while I was watching that review. I just thought the review was excellent. Mark, when you were talking about friendly, that got me. That really got me.
Yeah, it really got me.
Yeah. So just a beautiful review and indicative of what Mark can do. So hey guys, everybody check out his channel, especially if you like Grimdark, and subscribe to Mark's channel because he absolutely deserves it. So it's just great to have all you guys here and talking about Joe Abercrombie, First Law. We all have a different story in terms of how we got to be Abercrombie fans. So I'd like to start maybe with Mike, because I know you have a great story about, and it has a lot to do with, the whole beginning of your channel and everything else. So maybe we could begin with you.
Well, I found Joe Abercrombie through a friend. I was very frustrated, and this was before we got even the most recent Song of Ice and Fire book. This was between books 4 and 5. I was aggravated by how long it was taking, which is even more hilarious because it was shorter of a wait than we've had now. But a friend of mine said, hey, I think I know something that'll scratch that itch. And he told me about the First Law. And the first thing I asked him was, well, is the series complete? Because I was like, I'm not starting another series that's not complete again. I've got this PTSD over this now. So he recommended these. He's like, yeah, it's 3. It just finished. And this was in 2008. And I read them all in like over a weekend. And I was just blown away. And I was like, you know what? If George doesn't want to finish this series, this should be the guy who should do it, because this guy is everything that I have been looking for outside of A Song of Ice and Fire. And it made me kind of open that eye that, there's other good fantasy in the modern age outside of A Song of Ice and Fire. And that was when I first was introduced to Grimdark, which I think we're going to talk about here.
Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you. Patrick, how about you? How did you get into First Law?
I think mine is a bit similar to Mike. So before the Game of Thrones ended, the TV show, everyone it's a worldwide phenomenon, right? And well, I as I mentioned, I wasn't a really novel reader before 2016, but I wanted to get into reading novels more, and so I fell into the marketing scheme. I searched the Google and what's the best books for fans of Game of Thrones, and First Law came out a lot of times. So I gave it a try, And yeah, that's how I became a fan of Joe Abercrombie.
Nice. And how current, I forgot to ask you this, Mike, so you can inject this too, but how many of the books have you read? Have you read everything?
Oh, I've read them all. I just did my spoiler talk for the most recent book earlier this week. So yeah, I read it before you guys read it. I got to get the advanced reader copy of it, so I'm current.
That is
Although
so
Patrick
cool.
probably read it first, actually. Behind Patrick, I read it first. Yeah.
That is so cool. And by the way, that's a great video. I really enjoyed that spoiler review of Best Served Cold. So I mean, not Best Served Cold, but the Trouble with Peace. Right. Yeah. Sorry.
Mike's spoilers was really good. His all my archives one are really good too.
Yeah. So Patrick, how current are you? Have you read all the books so far?
Yeah. I haven't read his YA trilogy, the Shattered
Yeah, me
Sea.
neither.
I haven't read those either.
I haven't read that one, but the rest, yeah, I'm caught up.
Okay, cool. Mark, what about you? How did you get into Abercrombie, and where are you in your first law journey?
So my journey was definitely a little different. But right now I just finished Best Served Cold, and I'm actually really excited for the Heroes and Red Country and really everything. But to start out, I got to The Blade itself a long time ago, not when it first came out, but it wasn't that old. Like Prince of Thorns had just came out, and I was rolling off of the Brent Weeks's Night Angel trilogy, and I was really curious because that was the first time I'd seen fantasy kind of mature. It was definitely different than Tolkien. So I looked up and I found, The Broken Empire, The Blade itself, all these books, and people were calling them grimdark, and I was like, what is this? So I chose Broken Empire first, which certainly that baptized me in the darkest ways. So when I got to The Blade itself, I really enjoyed the book, but I was also, when I put it down, I didn't understand why I was so mad at it. It was a very strange feeling. I was like, man, I like this book, but at the same time, I don't. And I was just really conflicted. And it took a long time for me to revisit it. But when I did, I started to understand it for what it really was. And I think that was the major problem the first time around, is I was still really new into fantasy and I didn't really understand what was being done. But once I did, holy moly, I have the highest respect for that trilogy. But it took a while to get there.
Yeah.
Nice. So you've read the original trilogy and Best Served Cold so far. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, nice. Awesome. So I'm pretty current myself. I've read all the books except for Sharp Ends, the short story collection. So I got to read that. I don't know why I haven't gotten to it yet, but I'm going to get to it at some point, and I'm looking forward to that. I think it does fill in. Mike, you've read Sharp Ends, right?
I have.
Yeah.
I would say it's necessary, but there's some nice little Easter eggs in there that you'd enjoy.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
There's a Logan story in there.
Oh, then definitely got to read it. Yeah, everybody loves
young Glocta.
Yeah.
Wow. Before he was captured by the Turkish?
Before he was tortured, yes.
Before he was captured.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, cool. All right, well, that's incentive right there. So, well, let's talk about what you guys, let's leave this totally open. Whoever wants to go first. What does Abercrombie, let's start with what he does best. We're going to convince people, because I actually think that Abercrombie, though he's a popular enough fantasy author, I think he's underrated. I really do. I don't think he's read enough for the talent that is there and for just how wonderful and engaging these stories. One reason I really wanted to have this chat with you guys is to just tell people, hey, these books are awesome. Check them out. I think he's underrated. So what do you guys think Abercrombie does best?
Who's first?
Can I go first?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it, Patrick.
I think a lot of people can agree with this. It's his characterizations. I think there's something about Abercrombie's writing that definitely shows that, I've mentioned about this several times, that even when the names aren't mentioned, you will know who's actually speaking in the dialogues. And especially in the First Law Trilogy for Logan and Glocta, those two have very distinctive voices, and the same can be said for the side character West, and many more characters. And I think yeah, that's what Abercrombie does really, really good.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. I have this
Mm.
thing I call the dialogue test, and it's open the book to a random page, find some dialogue, and
Mm.
without knowing who's doing the speaking, can you tell who that character is? And I'm willing to bet you that Joe Abercrombie passes that test better than just about anybody. Because as you said, Patrick, I think that's a great insight. His characters have the most distinct voices, and that is
very,
very,
very
very hard to pull off, I think.
Mm.
Yeah. What about you guys? What else does he do really well, maybe better than anybody, or among the best?
Well, see, this is why I should have went first, because Petrick kind of stole my answer there. But yeah, it's characters obviously are what keeps it. I talk all the time on some of my reviews, and I know a lot of people talk about prose or world building be the first thing. For me, it's characters. If I love your characters, I'm going to love your world eventually, even if you don't Robert Jordan levels like describe it to me. I'm going to love that world. When I had that interview with John Gwynn, and he was talking about what he loved about Joe Abercrombie, he kind of mentioned the same thing about you can tell who his characters are just by the dialogue. I think that's a great way to put it. But I'll also give like a tip to his action, the way that he writes action in a way that it's never confusing, it's never tiring or exhausting. Because I mean, there are some books I've read recently where I'm like, look, the action's great, but it's kind of exhausting. I mean, 100-page battle, it's like, I think I could use a little bit of a breath now. But I don't think that he ever does it in that way. And the way that he makes it just so realistic. I've talked to people who have served in the military, and they say there's no one who does that better than him. And I'm going to trust them, since they've been on the front lines. They see what that's like. So
absolutely,
I won't spoil anything for you, Mark, but I'll just let you know that you're going to love the heroes if that's something you enjoy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, in terms of the action, I think you made a great point. I think Abercrombie is one of the best action writers. And one of the technique that he uses that I really love when he's doing action scenes, particularly battles, but he does it at other moments as well, where there's a lot of tension, is that the perspective switching that he does, from character to character, it really, and that's one of the reasons why I think his action scenes really read well, because he's giving you that constant shift. And that's something, Mark, you're going to see that in the heroes for sure. And he does it really well in the new trilogy. Both books in the new trilogy so far use that technique, and he's a master at it. What about you, Mark? What did you like about Abercrombie? What's he do now that we stole the two obvious answers?
I mean, yeah, those are super it, right? Because we all know how good his characters are, because his secondary characters are better than most people's main characters. And Mike's super right. The action, I would say, out of everybody I've read so far, Richard K. Morgan and Joe Abercrombie have the best action, and it's beautifully written, but it's also just brutal. And I do think, though, I agree with Mike, where I think Abercrombie kind of knows where to nip it, like cut it off, though, and feed you something else, and then kind of work you back into the action again later on. You know what I mean? Where you're not just getting hammered with it from beginning to end. But I will say this: I think one thing Joe Abercrombie is really, really good at is subverting fantasy tropes. It's clear as day. I mean, that's the whole point of the First Law Trilogy almost, right? Is the deconstruction of the quest, and I think that's something that people kind of get mad at him for. But I really like what Mike told me after I finished, Last Argument of Kings is, Mike, you told me the further I get away from it, the more I'm going to realize it's genius. And that's really what happened, because I started to realize how much stuff that he flipped on its head. It's crazy. And some of it's subtle and you might miss it. But yes, I think that Abercrombie is definitely one of the kings of flipping tropes on their asses, as well as, and this kind of plays with that because it's kind of trope smashy, but he paints these great unlucky scenes, where like in fantasy characters, and I'm not saying that his characters don't get lucky here and there, but where in a lot of times in fantasy, you just see luck being played out over and over again. Man, Abercrombie can paint the most unlucky scene and he'll just leave you laughing because you feel so bad for these characters.
And then you feel bad for laughing about it.
Which brings me maybe to one other thing that Abercrombie does about as well, maybe better than anyone, is the humor. I think some of the funniest books I have ever read. I actually laugh just like painfully. I mean, my stomach hurts after reading an Abercrombie book for a bit. So I think he's definitely one of the funniest authors out there, which is a strange thing to say. Maybe it isn't. I don't know when we're talking grimdark. So we're going to talk about that later, though, in a bit, like how well
It
this
is
fits
weird
in.
to laugh so much about books that are just so bleak and unforgiving at times.
Yeah.
That you
Right, they
laughing
are
quite a
funny
bit.
though. But I mean, even Abercrombie has said that humor is the best way into a character.
Mm.
That's a
And
great
I mean, I feel like you see that in his work.
And
Yeah.
Abercrombie has mentioned several times that he doesn't want his books to be complete darkness. He never want that because, in
Nihilism,
his
yeah.
opinion, that if it's complete darkness, what's the point of reading? He said that, and I think,
Yeah, and I think it is the humor that saves them from being that way.
yeah, the humor is being used for that, and I think it's a very, very great choice. Not a lot of authors can do that.
Which also
Mark Lawrence, excuse me. Sorry, guys.
Ha!
But it tells you, though, that Abercrombie is a guy with a great deal, I think, of insight into human psychology. This is a guy who clearly knows how people work. Would you guys agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he
you
was
just have to
actually
listen to the inner monologue that Galacta gives sometimes, more than just body found floating by the docks, but just some of the things that he's thinking. I felt like what I liked about Galacta so much with that is it was almost like he was the reader's thoughts. He was speaking the reader's thoughts, and it was
Well said. Well
almost
said.
in like a breaking the fourth wall kind of way, but it works because it's so
Right.
good.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Also capturing inner conflict. You know, Abercrombie is just genius at that. Because people are, we're kind of messed up. We have all these conflicting drives, and I think Abercrombie really brings that to the fore with a lot of his characters. It really makes them. One of the other things that really makes them alive for me is just how conflicted they are. You have characters who are cynical and greedy, but they're not despicable because you kind of like them. That's a thing he does really well too. Even the worst people, he made everyone love a torturer, right? How do you do that? That takes a special kind of genius, I think, to portray people in all their complexity and to make people like something about a character, even if that character is on paper supposed to be just awful. So, and he's just brilliant at that.
Yeah, I think it was Ed McDonald, the author of Blackwing, that said if Abercrombie wrote A Song of Ice and Fire, we'd all be following Joffrey and Ramses around and rooting for them.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That was my big shock when I first started reading this series. It's like I got through Blade itself. I'm about halfway through before they were hanged, and I'm just like, none of these characters are likable, yet I'm rooting for every one of them. It's so weird on both sides. It's so weird. I never experienced anything like that before. Not even with Song of Ice and Fire. I still felt like there was a Joffrey of characters that you found just absolutely despicable, and you couldn't find any redeeming qualities in. And that I was like, I kind of see they have a point. I don't know that Beth's wrong, So there was all kinds of things like this. So that was shocking to me reading this for the first time.
Anything else you guys want to add to the why Abercrombie is genius part of the discussion before we
I'll add on to what Mark said about the further you get away from it. I want to just kind of state here, when I finished this series for the first time, I was pissed at the ending. I was pissed off to the point where I was like, no one can write an ending anymore. I was so angry. And then like the further I got away from it, I was like, it's actually kind of brilliant. It really is.
It is.
So I won't spoil that for anybody, but just know that you will have a tough time swallowing that pill if you've never read anything like that before. The darkest thing I had read before that was Song of Ice and Fire, which is dark, but I wouldn't put it on this level of darkness. I really wouldn't. No. So it was a very, very shocking ending as someone who grew up cutting their teeth on Lord of the Rings. That was a very shocking ending.
But probably not as shocking as the end of the Dark Tower series, right, Mike?
Well, that's shocking for different ways, and I don't want to derail, so I'll just agree.
I actually haven't read that series, but I keep on hearing some things about the ending. I have no idea what it is, though.
I look forward to those thoughts.
That's a series that Mike's got me reading now, actually, Dark Tower. And I know, Mark, you're reading it too, right?
Yeah. I'll be finishing up the drawing of 3 at the end of the month.
Nice. All right. Well, back to Abercrombie. So I think we did a pretty good job there. Any weaknesses in the First Law books that you perceive, or just things you'd want to warn people about, that sort of thing?
They're not long enough.
jump in?
I can't speak for any book past Best Served Cold, but I would say from my experience with Abercrombie as a fantasy writer, I would say his weakness is probably his magic. I'm not saying it's garbage. I'm just saying it's not, if you're looking for something that's like a fleshed out, like ruled magic system, you know, if you're expecting to see these fireballs and all this crazy stuff all the time, you're not going to see that. And I really do think, though, that Abercrombie's better without magic.
For sure.
Interesting. So this is definitely not Brandon Sanderson level magic development here.
Not at all. Plus, I would say that Abercrombie is much more an investment than other authors, at least for me.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'd like to talk about the magic just a bit, because I think that's an excellent point. And if you are, you know, a Sanderson reader and you love elaborate magic systems, then yeah, you're not going to necessarily love First Law. But I kind of like the low end, if you will, magical system. I personally, and I have no problem with anyone who likes the more elaborate stuff, but I think that magic is better almost when there's a sense of mystery around it, when it's not too explained, because I think that's one of the things about fantasy that I find attractive is just the mysteriousness and the wonder of magic. I don't need to know exactly how it works. In fact, that's a thing that you notice that Abercrombie never gets into the heads of Baez, for example, right? Yeah. There's a reason for that. There's actually a couple good reasons for it. You can imagine it would be awful to be in that guy's head. But also, it's because it allows him to leave the magic mysterious. You know, if he had attempted to be, to make Baez a POV character, he would have had to explain a lot of things that he doesn't have to explain. And by leaving the magic ambiguous and mysterious, he actually increases our awe for this character. We're like the other characters in the book. We're like, holy crap, this guy is dangerous, right?
Yeah, super powerful.
Exactly.
I always felt his magic was kind of like Tolkien, where it's like, okay, yeah, wizards can do magic, and I'm not going to explain to you how.
Right.
Yeah.
Magic is magic, and let's just let it be magic. Like, and I'm cool with that. I think, though, that was something I noticed, that I was being kind of an asshole towards Abercrombie. I was being very critical of this, where I wasn't with anybody else, but for some reason, I started like pointing the finger, like, "Oh, your magic system doesn't make sense," you know. The funny
weeks post Brandon Sanderson world, it feels like it's got to be like that now. People,
and I think that's what the problem was. Is I had kind of rolled off of these books where it had been explained so much, and there was all these rules. But I want to say it might have even been Joe Abercrombie that said, like, when you start putting rules on magic, it ceases to be magic. So
I think he actually said that in Trouble with Peace again, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah,
I believe you're right. He has, well, I can't say the name of the character because that would be a little bit of a spoiler, but yes, that is exactly, or was it even? Yeah, The Trouble with Peace.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah.
Yep.
I also think his series kind of focuses on that time when we're going away from magic and into the industrial age. So it's kind of focusing on that as well.
Yep. Any other weaknesses? I know that a lot of people do seem to have problems with the blade itself.
I think if there is an and this is coming from me who love all of Abercrombie's books, I think there's a kind of too slow pacing in the first book, because Abercrombie's trilogy, not the standalone trilogy, all of them are designed like one big book divided into three.
Yes.
And in the blade itself, well, it's just the beginning. It's the foundation. It's just establishing the characters, the setting. And sometimes, if you're a new reader to the series, it can be a bit too slow. I think.
Yeah, as a standalone, it's pretty soft. It really is.
Yeah.
It's like reeling people in. That's why I tell people to try to commit to just reading the trilogy, because it is one story. That's like saying I'm going to read Fellowship of the Ring and then I'm going to stop. It's a standalone. It's just like, well, did we really do anything? So it really is just a setting up your kind of character thing. I mean, they don't even leave Adjua in the first book, do they? So I mean, it's very contained.
Yeah,
it's really just setting up your characters.
Yeah, the first book, The Blade itself, in the original trilogy, is a lot of character development. And if you love character-driven stories, I think you're going to be fine with that. You don't really get a sense for the plot until the end of the first book, maybe even the second book. Like, where's this going, kind of thing. And that does seem to bother some people. So I would give that as a heads up. You know, if you're considering reading the First Law books, just don't expect to understand where the first book, you know, where the plot's going necessarily just from the first book. Anything to add to that, Mark?
No, I mean, that's just it, man. I mean, it's those 3 books are one book, and it's tough sometimes to understand that. You want to look at it as 3 books.
Hey guys, you guys read Brandon Sanderson books. All 3 of these books are shorter than the Stormlight book, so just commit to reading these 3 books. Okay, there.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yes, it's all one big deal, and sometimes that's hard for readers. I know it was hard for me, even knowing it was just one big story. It's hard sometimes to really invest and get to see that. It's hard to not critique the Blade itself as lacking plot when you know what I mean? When you just review it by itself, it is lacking plot. But the thing is it's not a standalone novel. It's just it's like kind of like what Patrick was saying. Really, the Blade itself is like a couple chapters in this story, not really a book. And that's hard to wrap your head around sometimes.
And I think it's still easier for us because I think all of us were reading it when the trilogy was complete, right?
Yes, I did read it right when Last Argument Kings came out. So if I had to wait between books, I don't know if I'd become the mega fan that I am now, honestly.
Yeah, I have the impression that Abercrombie had these characters living in his head for a while, and the Blade itself was just him getting these characters out. Yeah. So, and then the plot really snaps into focus in the second book and before they're hanged. So nice. Well, shall we move on to the whole topic of Grimdark and how well do you guys think, you know, Abercrombie fits into this thing called Grimdark? What the hell is Grimdark? And I posed this question when I did my review of The Trouble with Peace, and I had some really great responses. If you don't mind, I want to read a few of them from some of my viewers. I think they're really informative. Isn't it great how we have viewers who are just like so smart and so well read?
Most of them.
A lot, yeah. So yeah, you get some. I've seen some of your more colorful comments too. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, but let me just read a few of these, and I hope they don't mind I'm saying their names, but I want to attribute these thoughts to them. There was one viewer named Zachariah Tal who wrote, this is in response to what is Grimdark. Okay. Personally, I think what defines Grimdark is a certain bleak tone and underlying pessimistic outlook regarding humanity. In Grimdark, the existential threats to humanity and the world are often internal, coming from our own moral failings and the systemic evil we create even without intending to do so. The cycles of violence, the oppression of minorities, the degradation of women, the ravaging of the natural world, etc. Even if there's a dark lord or a big monster in a book, a grimdark book will always believe that the true monster is us and what we create through our ignorance and apathy. So, and he also says feels appropriate to our current times. I think that's just such a great comment. I got a couple more. I'll try to read these fast. From Rob D. To me, Grimdark describes stories in which there's no clearly defined hero, no world-changing happy ending, and no victory for what we as readers feel is morally right. There may be heroic deeds and small moral wins, but the opposite is just as likely, if not more so. Characters do things for selfish, sometimes morally questionable reasons, and not for the classic ideals of good or honor. Good people may suffer or die while bad ones prosper. An air of menace and brutality pervades the world. Magic creates as many problems as it solves or is in the hands of those you would least want to wield it. Prophecies won't turn out well. So I thought it was just another really great definition. The last one's the shortest. This is from Rob Paul, who's always giving me these amazing comments. Overly Sarcastic Productions just did a good overview of what Grimdark is, and even if they aren't a fan, they get the gist. Grimdark has violence and gore, usually, yes, but it's more about the characters. They act out of selfish reasons and have gray going on black morals. No heroes to be found, and most certainly no heroic, all positive outcomes for any of them. But just having that in your story would make it too bleak and depressing for most readers. So you need to offset it. And humor is a great way to do that. If done well, the humor even allows you to go that much bleaker while still keeping it entertaining. I hear some common threads in those definitions. So what do you guys think is grimdark, and how well does Abercrombie fit?
I think those comments already got it.
Yeah, they didn't leave us
good.
much wiggle room there.
No.
Yeah, we don't have anything else to add. But I think there is a good point there about the gore and violence. There seems to be the tendency that when we say this is a grimdark book, people immediately think, oh no, it's going to be full throttle violence. But it's not always the case. And Abercrombie has showcases that it's not all gore. It's not all gory and violence. And as you mentioned, there is humor, and there is the characterizations, and there is the insight on psychology, and that works really well.
With me, I think what the standard definition is that it's morally gray characters, right?
Yeah,
I read a lot. Maybe it's because I read this first. I'm always just going to say that this is what grimdark should be. With me, I've read a lot of things that are classified as grimdark, and I read them, I'm like, okay, now that's just straight nihilism. That's not grimdark, because I don't care about your characters at all. Just making your characters worthless psychopaths, broken empire, to me doesn't make it grimdark. It just makes it nihilism. So that was the big difference between those two for me. And I apologize. I know that most of you guys are probably big Broken Empire fans. I didn't dislike it. I just, when you're comparing it to this, I was like, I don't really see it there. So yeah, with me, it's yeah, you pretty much nailed everything. But it kind of goes back to like what Stephen King always said, is where he says, yes, you can have the big scary monster, but the real monsters are us. And so I think that is absolutely true with grimdark.
Yeah, I agree.
Mark, you're my go-to guy for grimdark, so I'm really curious your reaction to all this.
Well, I'll say this. I definitely, grimdark is something I hold near and dear, and I know a lot of people start to think that I get real snobby about it. But I will say, probably
I was joking.
The most honest thing I could say about grimdark is that the more I learn about it, the less I know. And that's because it's kind of an evolving subgenre, and I'm really stuck in an archaic way of it. I still look at it like when it first kind of came to fruition, I guess, you know what I mean? So, and I like what Mike said, because I think your entry point is going to change, a lot of things for you. My first grimdark book was The Broken Empire. Right. So that really cast the mold on what was grimdark for me, which is why I had some problems with the Blade itself, because rolling into it, I'm like, wait a minute, this is #1 grimdark? It's not very dystopian. How come they're not, raping and killing everybody? How come I'm laughing at these guys? How come I'm not upset in my stomach? It was kind of confusing. And then I started, so over time, I've had to realize that, it's something that's much more broader than just what one book puts it out to be. And that was a hard pill for me to swallow. But I'll say this. I do know that grimdark, as far as like what we kind of understand it as, really was born out of subverting tropes. You had guys that were kind of tired of the Tolkien way, and they wanted to do something different. And I'm not saying that Joe Abercrombie, Mark Lawrence, and Richard K. Morgan were the first ones. I'm just saying that they are all kind of doing it around the same time. Where was I going with that? God damn it.
Okay, I forget something every time I talk. Don't worry about it.
I know. Well, it's tough, right? So anyway, okay, yeah, subverting tropes. That's what I feel like they were all doing when grimdark got really popular. You had Richard K. Morgan, who was destroying the happy ending. You had Abercrombie destroying the quest. You could say Baker is destroying everything, and you could say Lawrence was destroying the protagonist. In some ways, grimdark is the anti-fantasy. And then also another thing I think is that makes grimdark is a lot of the prose, sort of. I mean, really just in the delivery. Grimdark is not forgiving. It doesn't imply. It hits you with the gross, the brutal, all that. When I start seeing books and they imply the darkness, I just don't see that as grimdark. I think that you're trying to hit a broader audience, and I don't think that's what grimdark does. I think grimdark makes it dark. You know what I mean? Like, it's not going to be for everybody. Now, that's just my opinion. That's not necessarily the way it is. Like I said, I have an old school kind of thinking, and I'm still trying to fix that, I guess. I don't know.
Oh,
I'd like to add on that I don't think that grimdark is beholden to fantasy. A lot of people think it belongs just to fantasy. If you guys ever read Pierce Brown, science fiction,
Oh yeah,
I think
agree
besides Joe Abercrombie, that is my favorite grimdark author. And people don't know that he's grimdark because he doesn't start grimdark. But if you've read up to the current, Petra can probably back me up here. If you've read up to the most current Red Rising book,
Dark Age
I thought it was
instinct.
ghostwritten by Joe Abercrombie because of how dark it got. So it's definitely not just a fantasy thing, for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it came from sci-fi.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
I've heard a lot of people say the gap cycle
from
by
Warhammer.
Donaldson's supposed to be pretty grimdark.
I just finished Lord Foulsbane, so I could say I understand why some people would say it's like a precursor to grimdark, because Thomas Covenant he's not an anti-hero. He's just kind of a son of a bitch. Like, he's not a guy that you really want to follow from beginning to end. There's a lot. That book, it just kind of pops up a lot of questions. I respect that book a lot. I'm really interested in getting into it. But once again, I think that book is one of those like anti-fantasy books. It takes you on a journey into a fantasy land, but like it constantly zigs where everybody zagged.
I think the constant comment I get on my First Law videos is that Glenn Cook is responsible for all of this. Black Company. I haven't read those yet. Malazan kind of kicked it down the road again. So I don't know if you guys
you're
can
looking
confirm
at
or deny
like,
that.
I mean, you could keep going down the list all the way, but I would say
Michael
for
Moorcock
me,
and-
I think it's Michael Moorcock with Elric and Coram, and then you get Stephen R. Donaldson with Thomas Covenant, and then you get Glenn Cook with the Black Company, and those three
you
guys
go all the way back to Robert E. Howard, some of his Conan stories, if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, or you can go to like Carl E. Wagner or whatever his name was with the.
Or how about your guy Stephen King, Mike? I mean,
he's done a few of them. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Dark Tower.
After reading Gunslinger, I was like, if people are like, a lot of times ask me about like, oh, well, what's grimdark? And I'm like, well, you read Stephen King. I'll be like, dude, the Gunslinger is damn near a grimdark tale.
It's very dystopian grimdark for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Nice.
That
But
vibe,
you can apply just about any label of a genre to Dark Tower because it just takes all of them and just puts it in a big mixing bowl.
That's for sure. Yeah. So, I do think that it's not an inappropriate label when it comes to Abercrombie's First Law books, the grimdark label. He kind of embraced it, I guess, sort of ironically, calling himself
naming himself Lord Grimdark. Really,
yeah.
I think that was kind of like a piss take, right? I mean, he was just like, yeah, look, fine, I'm Lord Grimdark.
Put his flag in there and said, "This is mine."
Yeah. But I actually have this lurking suspicion that underneath the cynicism, Joe Abercrombie actually really likes people, right? I mean, he gets people, and he has this way, like we said before, of having his readers just love his characters. And I don't think you can dislike people and achieve that. So I think that there might be some misunderstanding out there about what grimdark is. So I really appreciate what you guys had to say about all that. So shall we move on then, unless anyone has anything else to say about the genre?
Read it.
There's no end to it.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what we say. We could all turn blue in the face, and none of us will still be any further to the answer.
That's true. But it's fun to talk about anyway.
Yes, absolutely. I'll talk about it ad nauseum.
So how about this then? This is kind of a silly question, but I feel like it's almost mandatory, and it's also kind of fun. Do you guys have a favorite First Law character? You can only pick one. And
can I say besides Glocta? Because everyone's going to say Glocta.
Or whoever says Glocta first gets Glocta, I guess.
You guys can have Glocta.
And also, you got to pick a favorite book. Which one of all the books so far that you've read is your favorite First Law book? All right, so who wants to go first?
Well, we'll stick with Petric's been going first. Let's stick with that.
Okay. I think this is a favorite book, right?
Yeah, favorite character and favorite book.
Oh, character. I think it will have to be a Glock for characters. But I think I like to get more into the book because I love all of Abercrombie's books, and I think the one that stands out to me the most is Last Argument of Kings.
Hmm.
And without mentioning spoilers, the duel battle that features in Last Argument of Kings, that was the first time that I was so uh, lost in the prose, completely lost. Like I was in the circle together with these characters, and I was so insane. This is insane. And not only that, the ending really, well, as we all keep on saying, it really stick with me. It really stick. No one does ending like that. No one. And I think that book really earned Joe Abercrombie the title of Lord Grimdark in that book. Because in his other books, it's not that bleak, in my opinion. That one is the one that's the bleakest. Yeah, that's my take on my favorite books in the First Law series. But all of them are great. All of them are great.
This is why Patrick is my brother from another mother, because we're gonna have the same answers here. I mean, Akta, obviously, I do want to give a quick little honorable mention to my favorite drunk uncle, and that's Nakomo Casca. I think that's like the best secondary character,
Nice.
especially if you've read through Best Served Cold. He absolutely steals that book. Anyhow,
Yeah.
Glokta, what was so fascinating about him, like we already talked about, is like right away I'm like, wait a second. So this guy's number one villain is Stairs? Okay, let me try to understand what's going on here. So from the beginning, I'm absolutely fascinated with this character and how he's able to make me actually care about him. As far as going through the series, Last Argument of Kings is my favorite because I said when I was up to about starting book 3, I was like, I think this is as good as the Song of Ice and Fire, except the politics aren't as good. And you get about 20% in the Last Argument of Kings, and you're like, that just blew my mind. There's a farewell on the throne that blew my mind.
Where you're jumping out of your seat.
Anything that happens in A Song of Ice and Fire, where I was like, okay, and that's the first 20% of that book, and it's just absolute insanity the rest of the way. So yeah, Last Argument of Kings is just so good. It absolute page turner. I seriously think I read it in 2 sittings. That's how much I love that book.
Wow. How about you, Mark?
Yeah, so it's funny you mentioned Casca because that was my go-to. As much as Friendly definitely hit me in the heart. Nakoma Casca, because like he carried over, right? And I was like I said, his secondary characters are just that good. And a lot of times those are the ones that I end up loving the most, even, and Casca was so good in this book, in Best Served Cold. That's also, I would say, my favorite Abercrombie book so far, just because the plot, the pacing, everything is there for somebody, so for me, it was almost like a reward. Not to say that the first trilogy is a punishment, but yeah. And Casca, I think one of the things I love so much about the way that Abercrombie fleshed him out is he really is an alcoholic. And I mean, it kind of paints this picture of both the funny things about that and also the sad things about that. And this is a character that can kind of make you smile and break your heart all within like a couple pages. And that is huge to me because that doesn't happen every time I read a book. So when a character jumps off the page and into my dark heart, I remember that forever.
Casca, I feel like his brain's about this big, but his heart, the dude is just like that.
And I think that's why
you want to talk about funny
right?
characters. Casca's a laugh a minute, man.
Yeah, he's so good.
Yeah, Casca, I love him in Best Served Cold. I didn't like him as much in Red Country, but it makes sense where Abercrombie brings him. So I don't want to say too much because I know, Mark, you haven't read it yet.
I'll wait until Mark finishes that book.
Yeah, I've already somebody already told me that he's gonna piss me off. So
you're a Casca
I'm
fan.
Like,
there's a reason Red Country's my
I know that
favorite
Joe Abercrombie has the ability to take anybody from hero to zero with no effort. So I'm preparing myself. But either way, I'm gonna.
Joe's the type to look at you and smile while he stabs you in the heart, not in the back, in the
heart. Sure. Well, you guys took some good ones. I guess that leaves me, Logan.
Logan.
I for a close second, I love the Dog Man too. He's just a great character. But Logan is a huge favorite.
I guess I kind of love them all.
Yeah. How can you not? How can you not? But I don't know why Logan is so appealing. I think it's because he is both the kind of, we mentioned Conan the Barbarian earlier, that sort of early kind of fantasy hero you'd find in those pulp magazines. But at the same time, he's a guy who's in the process of trying to change himself.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that gives him depth that I really enjoy. And it makes me like him, even though he's a berserker, you know, who's killed all kinds of people and everything else. So, and just the person he's trying to become is maybe why I like him so much. And that's a human struggle, isn't it? We're all trying to become somebody that we're not quite yet.
You talked about what we liked about the character. I didn't mention really the dialogue here as much as there's a passage that Logan has in the Blade itself where he's talking about all the bad things. I think he's talking to Malachus Quiet, and he's talking about all the bad things he did. And I was just like, this is something different than I've ever read. And he's very much like Conan, but if Conan also had the Hulk inside of him. So that's what made him unique to me.
Yeah. Or if Conan had a change of conscience one day, a midlife crisis, I guess, or something.
Dr. Jekyll. Yeah.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, the bloody
So,
nine is crazy.
is there anything else that you guys want to mention about First Law, and in particular, what things maybe potential readers should know coming, someone new to First Law coming into it? Any advice you'd want to give, or just anything else you want to say before we wrap it up?
Don't get attached.
Yeah. No happy ending.
Commit to reading the trilogy. I know it's tough for people to say, okay, I'm going to read these 3 books. Just don't judge it off the first book. That's my biggest thing.
Agreed.
And it's not because it's bad. It's just because it's the prologue.
Yeah, stick it
This
out. And that was kind of like what I said in my.
Series is really great if you can get past the first 3 seasons. It's not that. It's just the beginning of the story.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. I agree with what Mike said. You don't want to skip that first trilogy. I put that in my Best Served Cold review because I know there's probably going to be people out there that don't want to read 3 books. They want to read that one standalone. But that's not a good idea.
And the first trilogy played a lot into the newest trilogy. A lot.
Yeah.
A lot of it.
Yeah.
And
And read the standalones. A lot of people ask me, can you read the new trilogy without reading the standalones? I mean, you can, but you're going to miss a lot of stuff, like all the stereo stuff. You're going to regret it.
Yeah, it's a whole different story at that point. You know, you're getting like the skeleton of the story and not all the rest of the meat.
So read the First Law trilogy, the original trilogy first, then read the standalones, starting with Best Served Cold, and then the Heroes, and then Red Country, and then somewhere in there you need to read Sharp Ends. But then
Publication order.
Publication order.
All of them are fantastic.
The new trilogy, I think, is an indication to me that Abercrombie is just getting better and better and better. I love this new trilogy. I think he's got a shot at, maybe my first book is actually Best Served Cold, but I think it could become the 3rd book in the Age of Madness trilogy, the current trilogy, because I love what Abercrombie's done in the first 2 books. He's got the character work, which is, you know, among the best. He's got the action. And I think he's getting even a little bit deeper in terms of themes in this new trilogy. There's always been vengeance, revenge, what that does to a person. That's always been, you think of Pharaoh Malgene in the original trilogy. You think of course, Logan. You think of, it's everywhere. But I think he's got some more themes going. He's got class warfare going on in a Dickensian kind of way in this new trilogy. He brings in minor themes about sexuality, and he brings in immigration. And, you know, I just think he's got depth to him as a writer that people might not necessarily recognize because he's so entertaining. So I just say, you know, this guy's getting better and better and better. Jump on board.
Yeah, agreed. It's ridiculous though. He just keeps on getting better. So good, so good.
And I want you guys to quit just listening to the audiobooks and buying the books so he keeps writing them. You guys know he doesn't get a lot of the proceeds from the audiobooks. Buy the books, even if you just listen to the audio, because I want him to keep writing in this world, and that's not going to happen because he keeps saying that the audiobook sells better than the actual physical books.
I
And
think
that's
it's because
great
of
because I've heard that the audiobooks are awesome,
Mhm.
so I get it. But please support the guy because I'd like to get a bridge between this, so I know what the hell happened between Adjua and Styria and there's 3 wars that he always mentions. I'd like to know this story. So
Or buy both, I guess. Buy the books and the audiobook.
yes,
There you go.
That's better.
I'm sure Abercrombie would endorse that message.
you are, baby.
Give it the money.
If you write a 1-star review with that, he will tweet it about.
Oh, yeah, I like to put my really negative comments up. He likes to put out the negative reviews. I think they're hilarious. So
They're so funny sometimes.
All right. Well, I want to thank you guys. This has been a wonderful discussion. This was everything I hoped for and more. So this has been a lot of fun for me. And I'm sure that the viewers are going to really enjoy this discussion too. So thanks from the bottom of my heart.
You're welcome, man. You're welcome. Thank you for having
you for
us.
having
Yeah,
me.
thanks for having me on, Philip, and thanks, guys.
Yeah.
All right. Take it easy now.